So hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Whiting. I'm the dean. A quick reminder that we have closed captioning tonight for our virtual audience. It's the CC on the bottom of the screen. And for all of you, you just go to that QR code to find the closed captioning. I also want to invite you to the next two events we have here, the next two public programs we have here at the GSD. On Wednesday, the 29th, next Wednesday, architect and historian Mabel Wilson will deliver a lecture entitled The Measure of Freedom and Unfreedom, which is this fall's Jacqueline Tierwitt Urban Design Lecture. And the following day, on Thursday, October 30th, Joshua Ramus, who is the founding principal of New York-based architecture firm Rex, will reflect on the evolution of his work over the 10,887 days since he defended his master's thesis here in Piper Auditorium. I'm hoping that he doesn't spend 1 hour per day, but we'll see. We're going to try and keep him on time. So for more information and the full lineup, please look at the fabulous new website. So I first met tonight's speaker, Meriem Chabani, a couple years ago in Zalek, which is more east than south. It's a village in the German state of Saxony-Anhalt, part of the former GDR. I won't go into details as to why we were there with others, but my first introduction to Meriem was listening to her give a talk there entitled Sanctuaries. In it, she acknowledged the economic realities of architecture and then asked what kind of value might exist for architecture outside of or beyond this monetary one. Her question has remained with me because this question is absolutely at the heart of what each of us needs to consider as practitioners, as scholars, and as a community here at the GSD. Architecture isn't just a service rendered, but is always the construction of culture. In addition to that question, what remained memorable for me from Meriem's talk that day was the work that she showed. I didn't know New South's work beforehand, but I've been following it ever since. Their Muslim Space of Prayer, which is a new religious and cultural center in the 11th arrondissement of Paris, it's a project that remains in progress, and I'm confident that someday it will be built, encapsulates New South's way of working. They do an incredible job of community engagement, and they have an incredible design hand. Note the conjunction in that sentence. I didn't say, but they have an incredible design hand. I said, and. For all too often, those who engage responsibly with constituents seem to fear that a strong design sensibility will appear top-down. Meriem and New South offer a valuable model for practice. Students and practitioners alike, please be sure to take careful notes this evening. It's really such a pleasure and an honor to have Meriem Chabani here with us this semester as our Aga Khan design critic in architecture here at the Graduate School of Design. She's teaching an option studio entitled Anchoring Acts, which explores how ancestral and spiritual practices might inform new imaginaries. She encourages her students to delve deeply into the heritage of a given site to bring forth, through design, through materials, and through relationships, a new imaginary and a new world that produces new cultures. Meriem is, as I've already noted, a talented designer and, again, that important conjunction, an inspired thinker. She's previously taught at the African Futures Institute in Morocco, at l'École d'Architecture Paris-Malaquais in France, at the Royal College of Arts in London, and at EPFL in Switzerland. In addition to having been awarded the Europe Under 40 Under 40 distinction, she was named this year by Le Monde as one of France's leading creative voices. Were you behind the Louvre heist? No comment. But, is Aya wearing a tiara? But you can look up her bio details yourself. We're here to hear her. I'm so looking forward to her talk, and I know you will all enjoy it as well. Tonight's event is sponsored by the Aga Khan Endowment Fund at Harvard University, which is dedicated to studying Islamic art, architecture, and urbanism, and landscape design and conservation. Please join me in welcoming Meriem Chabani for tonight's lecture entitled South-South Cosmogonies.
Good evening. Thank you for being here. Tonight, I want to tell you 3 stories about a drawing, a pavilion, and a building. Together, they map a journey, and I want to thank Nasser Rabat for inspiring me to rewrite my whole introduction for this lecture, because I wanted to recenter the journey and that search for belonging, grounding, and perhaps new possibilities. And it all starts in 2015, when I was not invited to a party. The party was the biggest and most prestigious exhibition of student work in Paris at the Pavillon L'Arsenal. It gathered the city's young graduates celebrating the best architectural thesis of the year. I was a young graduate, and I don't mean to brag, but I had received high honors for my thesis, in fact, the highest grade in my year, and my professors had recommended my project for the exhibition. But my thesis was on a Bangladeshi town, Chittagong, and I was told that would not be eligible. It was the first time that I encountered rejection, not because of quality, but because of geography, because of what counted as central and what was relegated to the margins. Sorry, I'm still getting used to this. So this was the moment when the notion of the South, something that had permeated my whole life as an Algerian of the diaspora, began to shape how I understood my position in our discipline. South, not as a direction on the map, but as a position in the world. A position defined by distance from the center, by who gets seen and who doesn't, by whose stories are considered relevant and whose are dismissed as peripheral. A few years later, Paul B. Preciado published these words. This is an extract from his article, L'Invention du Sud, the invention of the South, published in 2017, and how they crystallize what I had been circling around. And I want to share these words with you. The South is not a place, but rather an effect of relations between power, knowledge, and space. Colonial modernity invents both a geography and a chronology. The South is primitive and past, the North is progress and future. The South is the result of a racial and sexual system of social classification, a binary epistemology that opposes high and low, mind and body, head and feet, rationalization and emotion, theory and practice. At the same time, the South is the site of capitalist extraction, the place where the North captures energy, meaning, pleasure, and added value. The South is skin and womb, oil and coffee, flesh and gold. So if I couldn't be invited, I decided that I would have to throw my own party, as I'm doing tonight with Aya. I convinced a Parisian art gallery to let me curate an exhibition with 6 graduation projects based in the Global South, from friends and peers whose work I admired. And the name of the exhibition was New South. The show proposed that the South was not a geography, but a constellation of shared conditions, political, social, spatial, economic, and colonial. Each project stood at the frontier of several disciplines. And through this exhibition, New South was born first as a collective and later as a practice. Our first commission came directly from this inaugural gesture, a cultural center in Myanmar, our first built project, and the image that you saw in introduction. This exhibition was my first attempt at questioning the canon. Not only what architecture looks like, but where and for whom architecture knowledge is produced. And this word canon is not insignificant. It it comes from the Qanun of Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, an encyclopedic treatise on medicine written in Arabic in the 11th century, later translated into Latin, and eventually becoming a major reference across Europe. Over time, we forgot where this canon came from. We naturalized it as Western. It's a striking example of how knowledge circulates, is translated, and sometimes disappears. Later, I had a chance to further this inquiry. The time I was invited to the party. In 2023, Leslie Loco invited me in my practice to take part in the Venice Biennale, the first African-led iteration. And I was tasked within a 90 by 90 centimeter square with bringing North Africa to the table. I knew that I wanted to work on North African domestic space, but it did not feel right to represent something so personal, so intimate, through usual architectural tools, a model, a plan, a section. Instead, I began looking at the history of carpet making in North Africa, and this Algerian rug, for instance, offers an abstract representation of a landscape. Its patterns and geometries create a sense of orientation, of space, while being deeply connected to local cultures of making. Rug making as a representational tool felt right. It allowed me to speak about domestic space not through measurements, but through texture, gesture, and memory, through the ways space is felt, inhabited, and transmitted. A domestic object to represent domestic spaces. I grew up between 3 homes on 2 sides of the Mediterranean Sea. And that's what I was interested in representing. In a similar spirit to Algerian rug making, I wanted this tale of 3 homes to remain simple, almost naive, yet deeply evocative. It's an intricate, intimate infrastructure of care reigned over by its women. The family gathers for celebrations, for mournings, for holidays. These moments reaffirm the domestic as the foundation of our identity, the fabric through which our family functions and remembers. Time and space become elastic and obscure as hours drift by in comfortable carpeted rooms. Barred and shuttered windows give little sense of the time of the day. People come and go in permanent flux. Schedules are passed through rumors, which later turn out to be false. Each member present is cared for, nourished, transported, entertained, clothed, and sent away with dates, boats of honey, leftover food, ancestral jewelry, wedding outfits, medicine, gossip, and family secrets, according to and in excess of each one's immediate needs. The carpet is both the medium and the herald of this queendom. It displays its spaces, its functions, its intimate and powerful elements. It embodies the force and continuity of this stretched space that contains and sustains the Algerian diaspora. The carpet is deployed for warmth, for comfort, for prayer. The carpet makes home. So we had to learn how to make a carpet. This was a true labor of love. 4 of us worked on it after hours at the office. John Edom, Marine Giloup, Melissa Dimina, and myself. We worked with a tufting technique, which is something relatively accessible to novices. You can learn on YouTube, that's how we learned. But it is demanding in terms of time, precision, and rhythm. And the wool was then trimmed and sculpted by hand. The rug was displayed at the Central Pavilion in Venice, and it was initially meant to end up in my mother's house. But it was acquired by the Maxi Museum in Rome and recently displayed in an exhibition called Stop Drawing earlier this year. Our worlds exist through the representations we provide for them. And representation is never neutral. In a sense, by bringing invisible realities to the forefront, it performs an act of revelation. The notion of hierophany, sorry, I struggle with pronouncing this name in English, hierophany, attempts to describe the manifestation of the sacred within ordinary profane circumstances. The term was defined by historian of religion Mircea Eliade, and although I encourage you to take his writings with a pinch of salt, he provides very useful starting points. A hierophany allows the divine or a sacred reality to appear, to be manifest through objects, a stone, a tree, a human being, or an unexpected act of kindness. And we find representations of this notion across geographies. Here is a painting by Aboriginal artist Dorothy Napengardi. Her work revolves around dotted representations of the landscape around Minamina, her country at the heart of Australia. So what you see here is a map. Minamina is the site of an important waterhole, and it is associated with many dreaming stories. Dreaming stories are a collection of narratives from indigenous Australian peoples that explain the creation of the world by ancestral beings and their connection to the land. It's an invisible landscape upon the physical one. The patterns that she weaves are strangely familiar, a visual language that conveys both landscape and cosmology, movement and memory. I'm fascinated by how cosmogonies produce specific systems of representation, and with them, entire aesthetic regimes. The mukarnas is a striking example. Mukarnas are a decorative molding applied to ceiling vaults with many local variations across traditional Islamic architecture. At first glance, they appear as intricate ornamentation, but they also serve a practical purpose. Sorry, I'm looking at Nasser, it's a bit unsettling. To create an elegant transition, and you tell me if I'm wrong, to create an elegant transition between a square and a circle, between an orthogonal space and a dome. This reflects another constraint in Islamic ornamentation, the non-figurative approach to representation. One theory suggests that the mukarnas pattern evolved from the natural corbelling that occurs when transitioning from an orthogonal space to a dome in brick construction. Despite these structural origins, the pattern evolved, complexified, and became decorative, crafted in plaster. Okay, great. He's giving me the thumbs up, guys. In 2021, I was given a carte blanche by the Siva Museum in Brussels. I wanted to use a carte blanche, meaning just do whatever you like, this is how much money you have, produce something with this. So I wanted to use this opportunity to pursue my interest in sacred spaces within profane places and to reassert constructive and construction innovation as central to contemporary Islamic architecture. So I collaborated with a Tunisian engineer, Radi Ben Hadid, who studied this pattern with me, working to retro-engineer the mukarnas, the ornament, moving from a purely decorative element to a structural system. As a basis, we opted for the shape of the catenary arch for its simplicity and efficiency in supporting its own weight, distributing forces evenly along the curve. Our design transformed the mukarnas from a decorative item into a self-supporting structural system. Formed by interlocking pieces, it is designed using parametric tools. In the spirit of pushing the boundaries of traditionally ornamental elements, I really wanted to use ceramic as a structural material, who some people might say was mad, and I agree with them. I have now the proof that it's absolutely insane to do that. But anyway, at the time I didn't realize, and the design went through multiple iterations, balancing simplification of that original pattern with retaining the fractal principle of the mukarnas, while making it viable in ceramic. Several constraints shaped this process: the thickness of each piece, the size of each module that needed to fit into the oven, the need for each element to also be manageable by a single person during assembly, because we didn't have the funding for massive machines to implement that. And in the end, we developed a total of 13 different modules that make up this structure, each one a building block in a system that is structural, aesthetic, and modular. We collaborated with Gorban Ceramics, a Turkish manufacturer that has existed for 100 years. They offered a rare balance between handcraft and industrial processes, allowing us to combine precision, scale, and craft. On the left, you can see prototypes of the molds we produced. Initially, we thought we would design everything digitally and then 3D print the molds. And then we would just put some earth in it, some clay, and then we bake it, and it's ready, and everything works. So that's not what happened. First, we realized that we could not actually 3D print the molds. At least Goban Ceramics told us this is not going to work because ceramics does something which is distort. And I hadn't thought of that. And so instead, the molds were all hand sculpted by one artisan in Istanbul who had been working with Goban Ceramics for years and who understood how to account for the deformation caused by firing the ceramic. And we suggested just calculating the deformation and adapting the 3D printed molds accordingly, but Goban Ceramics just insisted that the only process they trusted was the handmade models. So instead, we created models of molds and then replicated them using 3D printing, combining human intuition with digital precision. So we tried to build the structure. And we quickly realized that making a full-scale mock-up of the structure for our first try was simply not going to be possible. The first constraint was actually money. We had run out of funding. And so we didn't have the funding for the centering structure to allow the vault to be built. And we were also confronted with uneven deformations in the ceramic pieces. So with all of that preparation, we still had some crazy differences from one module to the next, sometimes ranging between, a few millimeters to 5 centimeters, so inch to inches, almost. Unlike stone and brick, ceramic cannot be cut without compromising the entire piece and the overall design. So it made the construction process uniquely delicate and unforgiving. So we ended up using this opportunity to assess what worked and what didn't. The geometry of the ceramic had both an unyielding quality that made adaptation or simplification nearly impossible. It simply was what it was, and it needed to be built as is. Had we worked with any other material or followed a different principle, we would have adjusted this project 100 times over. But here we had to commit to the material, the geometry, and the integrity of the design. Cédric Libert, the art director of SIVA, left to become director of the architecture school of Saint-Étienne in the south of France. He wanted us to complete this experiment because he's also mad and asked us to bring the pavilion to a permanent site in a local industrial park. By relocating the structure, we decided to integrate it into the landscape, filling the back with earth to grow plants. But this posed a massive challenge, as we were also tasked with making this a pedagogic construction process for architecture students. Instead of building with independent ceramic pieces, we needed to simplify this process, make it quicker. And so we consolidated them into modules holding 2 pieces each, interlocking like Legos. So the ceramic, instead of being a self-standing structure at the end, became a coffrage perdu, a lost formwork. This is just my interpretation of the translation, so if this is not right, you tell me. With hollowed concrete in the back, providing support for the tons of soil and water that would need to be held behind the structure. And in this iteration, and being forced to engage with this new iteration, we found that the pavilion was becoming a 2-headed nest. Its relief creates habitats for non-human life, echoing the swallow nests found in Ottoman mosques. The whole process was grueling, intellectually, physically, and mentally. Intellectually, we had to adapt the structure, finding simple and cost-effective ways to realize a complex form filled with imperfections. Physically, because we were hands-on in both constructions, involved in every stage of assembly. And mentally, because we worked tirelessly to secure the funding required to bring the project to completion. our engineer, Radi Ben Hadid, shared this prayer with me, which is the cathedral builder's prayer from the Middle Ages. He specializes in restoration of historic churches, and these words brought us a lot of solace, and especially that line about teach me to foresee the plan without torment, to imagine the work without despair if it takes another form. And I think we can all relate to this. So this was a rough computer-generated render that we produced for the planning permit of the pavilion when we asked for permission to build in the park. And this is a photo taken at the opening about a month ago. In the end, the imperfections disappeared. Strikingly, it looks almost identical to the render we had produced. The unyielding geometry and unforgiving material somehow absorbed the irregularities, leaving only a coherent logic visible. And what I appreciate about this project is its ability to manifest something poetic within a profane space. As it stands, it requires no explanation to immediately create connections with people in the area. From what we have observed, it speaks to different types of audiences and especially resonates with children who engage with it intuitively and playfully. The moss and the plants are growing well. Because we involved many people from the area, including local teenagers who we had been warned against, the project has created a sense of ownership that continues to surprise us. The site is also near a mosque, and people attending prayer would pass through, interacting with the structure organically. This project was made possible thanks to the support of the Graham Foundation, the Fonds de Dotation Quartus, and remarkably, the French Ministry of Culture, whom we managed to convince that this was a one-to-one scale experimentation without ever mentioning its sacred dimensions. And I think that one of the reasons I'm interested in creating visibility for sacred practices is probably due to the context I grew up in. France is a secular country with a fraught relationship with religion in general and its Muslim communities in particular. First, let's clarify how Islam became a French religion and how, in that process, I contend that it was also constructed as a race. In 1830, France colonizes Algeria. It later declares it as part of the French national territory. It's not something that stands outside of it. It fully belongs to it, and it becomes a settler colony. Algeria offers a valuable case study of how religion was racialized under French rule. Indigenous peoples' identity cards featured their faith as a key identifying characteristic. More strikingly, even if someone converted to Christianity, the ID would still list Muslim, simply adding Christian after it. This bureaucratic practice reveals how deeply religion was entangled with racial and colonial classification. But there is another religion that offers us a striking example of conditional access to French citizenship and to whiteness. Jewish Algerians made up about 10% of the population when France colonized Algeria. In 1870, the Décret Crémieux manufactured the separation by granting French citizenship to Jewish Algerians exclusively, creating a legal divide between them and the rest of the indigenous population. This decree reinforced colonial hierarchies by designating Jews as citizens, Muslims and other groups as other subjects, denied many rights and freedoms. But then in 1940, Nazi collaborating Vichy France abrogated the Crémieux decree, stripping Algerian Jews of their French citizenship. While Algerian Jews were not subjected to the mass deportation seen in Europe, they faced severe discrimination and exclusion under Vichy rule. Many lost their civil rights, were dismissed from public positions, and were subjected to anti-Semitic laws and policies. This period exposed the fragility of their conditional citizenship. So now you understand how, specifically in the French context, discussing the visibility or invisibility of certain sacred practices inevitably involves racial and colonial power dynamics. This map shows the prayer spaces available for Muslims in Paris and its close suburbs in 2012. Larger white dots indicate mosques, and small white dots are prayer rooms. In the green squares, they mark the so-called foyer de travailleurs migrants, so migrant workers' housing. And these residencies are an important part of the city's prayer infrastructure. They often host informal and sometimes illegal prayer rooms, although they will show up on Google Maps. And now this is the map for 2028. You might notice that the green squares are gone. This is because France has begun a major renovation project of migrant worker social residencies. These renovations systematically, and I say systematically, eradicate informal prayer spaces, and the new designs drastically reduce the size of shared spaces, making communal prayer areas virtually impossible in the new projects. As a result, what we see between 2012 and 2028 is a significant decrease in available prayer spaces for Muslim communities. Now, does this decrease correspond to a decrease in need? You have the answer, no, obviously, based on our calculations, and it's difficult to make these calculations because ethnic statistics are forbidden in France, but based on our calculations, about 7% of the needs are covered. So that was about quantity. Now let's talk about quality. I like to play a little game called Guess the Mosque. Can you find it? Want to take a guess? It could be a good place, right? But it's not. It's actually this nondescript entrance right here, that gate to the right after the pharmacy, and it leads to a basement. And this is what shows up as a mosque on the map that I've shown you before. So this is also something that you need to take into account when looking at this map. And this situation is not an anomaly. It's the prevalent condition. Muslim places of worship in Europe are mostly adapted from existing buildings. This is actually the case in many European countries, often located on ground floors or basements rather than purpose-built structures. Inside Paris, there is one notable exception to this rule, La Grande Mosquée de Paris, which is the first mosque in metropolitan France, and it was built in a neo-Hispano-Moorish style in the late 1920s. So what's the late 1920s? It's in between the two world wars. Right after the aftermath of World War I, this was built to honor the tens of thousands of Muslims who died for France, the vast majority of whom came from the colonies. At the time, these Muslims were considered as alien, and this is something that we see here. It's not surprising that the architectural references chosen for this mosque came from the two French protectorates, which is a fancy word for colony, of the era, Morocco and Tunisia. This architecture, built in Paris, reinforces the idea that Islam is intrinsically foreign to France. In the suburbs of Paris, we find more examples of visible mosques, and they tend to look like this. This is the Grande Mosquée d'Argenteuil, and it's a former car factory that was converted by its own workers. They attempted to transition this factory to a mosque and make it legible by adding a minaret, a dome, and pointed arches on the facade. The dome is historically a structural response. It allows a big span without having pillars disrupt collective prayer. But in this concrete building, it doesn't serve any purpose. And in France, the call to prayer is forbidden in public space. So the minaret also loses its original function. The decorative elements reproduced are often vague echoes of motifs drawn from specific cultures and contexts. But the thing is, things have a cost, and things have a meaning. When repeated and stripped of their meaning, these elements become ghost limbs of a body in constant evolution. In other words, a copy of a copy of a copy, a caricature. Which begs the question, what could a truly French mosque look like? That is the question that I was asked to answer by a local Muslim community in the 11th arrondissement of Paris, a historically working-class area now well along the path of gentrification. That Muslim community owns and operates a mosque located across the Maison des Métallos, a cultural center dedicated to the metal workers of the area. And they are located on prime real estate. It's become really expensive. And it's right in front of Square Jean-Pierre Timbaud. It's a land that holds a lot of value. And this is what the streets look like every Friday. The massive demand for prayer space, combined with the inability to manage crowds inside their building, creates significant challenges. Even with security personnel organizing worshippers into 2 consecutive Friday prayers to accommodate everyone, the streets remain overcrowded. Recently, they have even had to hire additional personnel and organize a 3rd consecutive prayer on Fridays to try and manage that demand. But can one place solve a systemic issue? So in their case, like in the other examples that I shared with you, this is a building that was adapted. Their mosque is a former paper factory that they retrofit in the 80s. Inside, the spaces are very degraded. They asked us to design a new mosque for them. And their request was simple. 1, we need to accommodate the maximum number of people possible. And 2, because we are French, we want our mosque to be French as well. It's a big question. And to even start thinking about an answer, we need to ask another question. Fundamentally, what is a mosque? And here, I will give you my interpretation. We found that it bottles down to 3 elements. A mosque requires orientation towards Mecca, a clear distinction between profane and sacred space, and the capacity to pray collectively. This idea can be seen even in the simplest of settings. Here, a Bedouin praying in the desert, using a simple stone enclosure, a reminder that the essence of a mosque lies not in monumental architecture, but in its function and spatial logic. In the hyperdense context of Paris, this system cannot be spread out horizontally. The plot that we have is a 350 square meter plot, which is what, 2,500 square feet. Okay, thank you, Nasser. In the hyperdense context of Paris, we had to deploy this vertically. And so we just looked at that to begin with. We spent weeks figuring out how to manage the vertical and horizontal movement from profane to sacred spaces while balancing the size of the prayer halls with the resulting dimensions of the stairs, all in accordance with local regulations. The solution involved vertical distribution of levels and a Chambord-style staircase system, which allows for overflow management and smooth flow of people inside the building. It's a design that is meant to help unclog the streets, reducing overcrowding during peak prayer time. It means that we don't need to wait until one floor is full to start filling in the others. And once we had resolved the practical issues of circulation, access, and fire safety, we faced the truly difficult question: how would this mosque relate to Islamic architecture? What remains if we give up all the expected symbols? The minaret, the dome, the pointed arches. We chose to turn to rituals and to scripture. I found inspiration in Ayatun Nur, which describes God as light upon light. And this passage allowed us to recenter a spatial element in our design thinking, prioritizing experience, atmosphere, and spiritual resonance over decorative citation. The second essential element is movement and rhythm. Muslims pray 5 times a day, participate in 1 communal prayer per week, and observe multiple holy moments throughout the year. So I wanted the design to reflect these 2 essential elements, light and movement. At the same time, I wanted the building to playfully challenge invisibilization, to be both hyper-discrete and hyper-visible. It needed to reflect light, but also to emit it, to be opaque, but transparent. Just seeing that my baby is playing on the floor. And to achieve this, the project is conceived as a glass house with successive layers of membranes that can open or close according to the wishes of its inner occupants. 2 double-height prayer spaces are stacked vertically, and the facade is draped in a mobile metal mesh, allowing the building to modulate light, transparency, and privacy dynamically, but also to anchor it in the history, on the working class history of metalwork from that neighborhood. We are collaborating with structural engineering firm SBP, who are specialists in mobile stadium covers, to develop this innovative facade system. The mosque accommodates secular activities in a variety of spaces: multifunctional rooms, a library, exhibition spaces, and offices. The spaces are not partitioned by fixed walls. Instead, curtains of soundproof fabric create modular and fluid spaces that evolve to accommodate a range of uses and mirror the temporal and kinetic rhythm of worship throughout the day. Textile is used to manage both spatial layout and acoustics. These 2 axonometrics show the same section of the building operating either as profane or sacred space. During prayer, curtains are drawn along the facade to create intimacy and enclosure, but when the space functions as a library, the curtains are drawn against the walls to absorb sound and maintain a quiet environment. This project sits at the heart of the local political landscape. Planning permits have had to be delayed through successive presidential elections, shifting local regulations and political attacks. Since beginning our collaboration with this community, and since you last saw this project, Sarah, we have witnessed unsettling levels of state control, violence, silencing, and obstruction. We have had to battle with the city, which attempted to make the lot unbuildable under its new local urban plan. And Antoine, as you well know, they just changed the regulations. That's when they tried to do it. And we managed to prevent that. But currently, we are fighting against an attempt to remove an entire floor level from this project. This is an ongoing struggle, but one we are very proud to lead. And I believe that Paris and France might finally, perhaps, have its first true local mosque. To close this lecture, I want to return to 10 years ago, when everything began, because there's someone that I really need to thank. Amin Ibn al-Mubarak was my friend. This is him. And he's standing here in front of his thesis project on Mecca's real and imagined infrastructures. We co-founded New South together, and in the end, we were only able to collaborate for a month. He was 29 when he was murdered. on November 13, 2015, during the terror attacks in Paris. It happened on the last day of our very first exhibition, when we were meant to take everything down together. And I remember my heartbreak and the feeling that the world had ended, and I remember wondering what the point of it all was. But the world went on, and I went on. And perhaps the one thing that we all share is heartbreak. Bata Sharia writes about heartbreak not just as personal loss, but as a condition shaped by social breakdown, racial capitalism, and collective sorrow. Heartbreak, unavoidable as it is, can also be generative. It can open us to one another, make us vulnerable, and guide us towards solidarity. In her words, heartbrokenness is the class consciousness of racial capitalism. I am not ending on a sad note. I am full of hope. I went on because I believe that our worlds deserve to exist, and it is worth dedicating one's life to making them happen. Cosmogonies are the myths, theories, or narratives that explain how the world came into being. Bringing these conversations from the fringes to the center allows us to engage with land, belonging, and care. That's the work that we are pursuing here with Option Studio Anchoring Acts. And I also want to thank my fantastic students for bringing so much to this exploration, for being here tonight. And I also want to thank the GSD community, particularly Sarah and Grace, for welcoming me and creating a space for this work to grow. This work is a journey. We have not arrived yet, but we will. Thank you.
You do have to speak into a mic for the Zoomers.
Thank you so much. What a fantastic work and lecture. I'm really just so inspired and admiration of all your work. I wanted to ask you about this last project that you were showing, the mosque. I know from the last 20 years, the anti-mosque debates in Europe were always packaged, the racist attitudes were packaged in architectural arguments. This mosque doesn't fit into our local landscape. It's a foreign architectural language. So it was a kind of fitting in, not fitting in debate. And you have designed something that obviously references local history. It is a French mosque. So what are these arguments in terms of architectural vocabulary now that kind of, are they packaging this into policy? How is this racism now architecturally explained? It would be interesting.
So what's interesting is we don't have any frontal debate on this question.
So it's like open.
It's like everything, it comes from the sides. And so one of the first hurdles that we had with this project was actually a law that was voted in France, the Loi Séparatisme, which was clearly targeting the Muslim community at large, but really resulted in police presence in places of gathering from Muslim communities. And I'm not just including mosques in that. And that means that there was actually forms of intimidation that were ongoing, associations that were dissolved. For example, the CCIF, which was the Comité contre l'Islamophobie, the Committee Against Islamophobia in France, was shut down. There was no legal reason for it. That's because the state has the power to shut down an association. And so it was then recreated in Belgium as the Comité contre l'Islamophobie in Europe. And so it just meant that for our clients, they needed to lay low. And because it's an existing mosque, they also received visits from the police. And we witnessed how people, children, were being intimidated, but also like this power dynamic being made extremely clear that you're being surveilled and you need to be careful what your next step is going to be. And so that basically created a dynamic where our clients themselves wanted to lay low, and they're like, okay, we can't submit a planning permit now because we don't want to attract attention in this context. So we wait. We wait until things get better. And then we wait and something else happens, and it never gets better. And this is something that truly I can confidently say now, after pretty much 5 years of working on this project, is that every single year, every couple of months, something new comes up that forces us to fight back in different ways. But the truth of the matter is that we also have a lot of support. We have support from inside the institutions. We have support from inside the systems. But we do not have support from, let's say, the higher-ups in these institutions. And so we found ourselves trying to navigate the goodwill of people who work within the city, who work within the planning application committee, who are actually trying to help us, who give us advice, but there's also limits to their own power. And so you kind of almost reach a point where if you don't have goodwill at the level of the president and the state, it's just not going to be possible. And unless, like everything, you don't get given anything for free, but unless you create a power dynamic that is favorable. And so that's why gathering support for this project and also countering racist discourses around mosque architecture and defending the fact that the discourse that has been so far presented in France has been of integration and of, okay, but why don't they integrate? Why don't they behave, look, and do things like us? If you manage to counter that, it becomes difficult to then have a battle where we're being told, no, but you need to get rid of the minaret, otherwise it's not possible. Like, we kind of are beyond that conversation. So we're having ghost battles that are happening in the background.
So I want to piggyback on Nasra's question. First of all, I love the project, but the entire lecture was very beautiful as well. Not surprisingly, but still, it was nice that you delivered so well. Thank you.
Thank you.
But I wonder if there's any resistance from within the community of the fact that it doesn't look like a mosque. It looks like a community center that's quite elegant. And so to what extent there's either a fear of the Trojan horse of hiding a mosque and enabling a mosque, or if there's a fear of erasing the legibility of a mosque.
Yeah, that's actually a big question that we have to contend with. Something that I actually didn't mention is that for a whole year we did spend our time leading community engagement process. Maybe that's why you asked me the question. Okay, so we did, before designing anything, it just, to be honest, I was terrified to work on this project, and I just didn't really know where to begin. And so we spent a year working with the local community, but also with young Muslims who did not attend the mosque, and people who did not attend mosques in general, but would have liked to. And so trying to bridge the gap between, let's say, maybe also an older generation, because a lot of the members of the community who have been here for a long time, they have children and grandchildren, and the younger generation. And I think what really helped us is, one, the vision of the president of the Mosque Association, who keeps telling us, we're not building a mosque for us, we're building it for our children and our grandchildren, and their own children. So we need to make sure that they're part of that conversation. But we also spent a lot of time trying to discuss with them what a mosque is, because I think also for myself, but also more broadly for Muslims in general, we also needed to engage with an intellectual exercise where we really looked at how the typologies that we're so familiar with came to be. And also to go back to the beginnings, where the very first mosque, from the descriptions that we have, was a rectangular enclosure with no dome, a proto-minaret, but everything that served a purpose, but also worked with logical, structural, and material responses. And so I'd say that the argument that we have with the community, but also that I hold and that I believe in as a designer, is that sacred architecture in general has always been a field of innovation. So what we wanted to reach is one type of innovation in that project. And that's why that mobile facade, the metallic mesh facade, we have some precedents of metallic mesh that has been used in like tall buildings, but always as something that is static. And then we have a lot of mobile infrastructure for stadiums that span a long way that we also have as precedents. But we do not have these two things, and especially not in a facade setting. And so that's kind of what we are pushing, and this is, to us, what also defines it as a mosque.
Good evening. I wanted to say thank you for giving such an inspired and wonderful talk. And I wanted to ask a question about, I thought it was wonderful that you spoke about the modern tradition of communing in homes and residential complexes for worship. And it's obviously so crucial to have specifically religious spaces, especially for the communal nature of Islam. But I was curious if there has been design work, or if you've thought about maintaining the tradition of religious spaces in homes and designing future residential complexes integrating that tradition.
That's a wonderful idea. We haven't had the opportunity to work on that topic, but I think you should. No, I think you're making an excellent point, and also I'd say that more generally in the global south, the idea of public space and where public space is located and what we can qualify as public space doesn't necessarily just lie outside, but permeates thresholds, housing, and other types of buildings. So I think this is your next lecture.
Meriem, thank you so much. That was a great lecture, thank you. I am curious now just to know what is on the boards for you right now. What else are you working on? I'd love to know, how are you extending all of this research into new projects, and or if are they unrelated to these subjects? Tell us what's on the boards.
All right. Thanks, Grace. This is like the pitch moment. Well, actually, this truly is only a small part of what we do at the office. I mean, we are an office, so we work on a variety of programs. Most recently, we've been working we're finalists for the competition for the Grenfell Memorial in London. But we work on housing projects, cultural projects. We have just finished the African Cultural Center in Paris, which is set to open in November. We work on a variety of programs, but we try and deliberately choose either topics that will allow us to work for underserved communities or to bring out invisible or invisibilized narratives, which is a struggle because it also means that we have to say no to things that maybe make my life easier. But in a sense, the amount of time that we choose to dedicate to things that do not further our agenda or do not further, our broader goals, I think in the long run are actually quite counterproductive. So I'm like basically every night I go to bed wondering if I should make my life easier saying yes to certain things or pursuing certain things. But I know that at the end of the day, the moment I do that, I no longer have time for this. I no longer have time to grow a practice that echoes the ethos that I'm trying to nurture. But it's a complicated balance, because obviously we also do sometimes do, just a regular collective housing projects, because I also need to pay people at the office.
Thank you, Meriem, for a wonderful lecture, but also for the beautiful way you presented your trajectory. So I want to take you to an earlier moment in your trajectory and ask you a question that is exactly the same way you responded to the gentleman over there about this is his project, and perhaps actually propose what should be your project. I very much appreciate your defiant stand in the way you are introducing if you want, sort of like a new form of Islam to France. And I'm very well aware of the kind of racism that is spreading all over Europe, but in particular in France and in Germany, for reasons perhaps of the number of Muslims in these two countries. So after your moment of the Salon des Refusés that you did over there at the beginning of your career, I'm wondering if you actually can imagine yourself, like the early Impressionists, sort of like putting together a new, defiant, challenging, responsive form of architectural practice that is, you are trying to change opinions and minds, but perhaps actually in the design profession, you would have a much better chance in changing minds and approaches, specifically through such defiant gestures and gathering more people. So is this something that you might consider?
Yeah, that's not an easy question to answer to. I feel like, to respond to this, I will also go back to what actually happened that I did not mention in my lecture, which is that initially when New South was created as a collective, it was only a research platform. It was not meant to build anything. It was not meant to pursue design. And the reason for that is that I actually created another practice with a different name, which was called TXKL. Don't ask me, it was the OMA MVRDV vibe I was trying to go for. But the reason for also that name that didn't really stand for anything was I felt I was trying to hide behind something that would be more generic, more nondescript, but that would allow me to get in and to be invited. And I think for a few years, that's how I operated. There was New South, where I was basically having fun and doing what I was actually interested in. And TXKL, that was, let's say the professional vehicle through which you try and get commissions, you try to be part of the trendy new Parisian young architects that get invited to, the competitions and win awards. And I did win some awards like that. Actually, the first competition I won was in Greenland, so very much the north. But and so I think that not yet. But it's just that that's how I had to operate for a while, and I felt like that's how I needed to operate for a while, and that whatever New South was not really a valid professional vehicle. And then at some point I realized I was basically spending my days like going from one thing to the other, and there was no real separation in the practice between research and design. And so we just accepted to stand in that truth, and New South became the practice and kind of encompassed both those research aspects and trying to convince real estate developers that, it's absolutely valid to kind of obviously, I don't bring the same discourse to everyone because, like every good immigrant, I know how to code switch, and this is something that also we have to do constantly in the practice. And I think, Sarah, you actually witnessed that not too long ago, because Sarah was standing in a jury of a competition that we're doing at the moment in Prague. There you go. It's official. It's public information. But the thing is that we also, for example, work a lot on the notion of vulnerability. And I think this is something that is present in this work, but the way I have managed to make it legible and maybe a selling point in my business is to also talk about how this means including different types of bodies, children, elderly people, and actually conducting research on that. We have a book on age-inclusive design, but it's something that I needed to do to try and make sure that what seemed so obvious to me when dealing with the self, really we are talking about vulnerability, needed to be translated into something that a real estate developer can understand and get behind. Piracy, guys, that's the way forward.
Bonsoir, Meriem. I really enjoyed listening to the lecture. I am enamored with the idea of taking religious scriptures to get inspiration for the mosque design proposal, and it's really a great project. And my question is for this first project, actually. I wonder if you can explain the parametric design process of the one-on-one scale of the Muqarnas.
So actually, the concept was very quick to come up with. I think because it's something that had percolated for a long time. We had already been working on the mosque at that time. And so I was interested then again in this idea of, how do we bring in a technological innovation take on something that is traditionally associated with Islamic architecture. And something that I tried to avoid with the mosque, which was to be directly referential to something that's super identifiable. Any Muslim will recognize the Muqarnas as something that belongs to that broader epistemology. In the pavilion, I was like, okay, this is a chance to actually face that and try and push it. And so the way we did it is first, we spent a lot of time just studying the mathematics behind generating Muqarnas and the fractal principle of it. And the difficulty was just to make sure that that worked with ceramic. So basically, it was I think we spent a year making models, 3D models, and doing meetings with Gorban Ceramics' engineer to make some mock-ups, some small mock-ups to make sure that the real fragile point is the teeth of the Muqarnas, right? So these were the elements that were super tricky to get right. And so most of the design really didn't stem from generating the geometry. The geometry we had the rule for, and then obviously we needed to simplify it and have multiple iterations, but we didn't come up with the principle of the Muqarnas. We just gave one take on it, like we have many different takes on it across the world. So really I'd say that the specificity of it is both the material madness and let's say the fact that we have researched quite a lot of other projects that were done with Muqarnas, and we couldn't find something similar that had, let's say, managed to make it into an absolute self-standing structure, which was the goal. I don't know if this answers your question, but I hope it does partially.
Hi, thank you, Meriem, for an amazing presentation. So I have two comments/questions in which I'll play a bit of a devil's advocate, just to hear more about you in that regard. Don't you think it's a bit going in circles that architects would disregard the tradition of 1.5 millennia and decide to go to the Quran and single-handedly pick a verse which eventually ends up being the same verse and apply that to architecture? That's one thing. And I think that probably was one of the reasons that the building looked certainly French, but is it Islamic? And I wonder how important is showing the Islamic identity in a building in France now is. But yeah, I just want to hear more from you about these two comments.
This question comes up a lot, actually, and I'd like to challenge you on that, because when you look at a Malian mosque, do you consider that it's not Islamic? A Malian mosque, like a mosque from Mali, from, you know, mud earth architecture that has existed for hundreds of years. Is that not Islamic? No. There's no domes. There's no patterns that are reminiscent of the Arabo-Andalus patterns that we are familiar with, or the Ottoman mosques. But where do Ottoman mosques stem from? Hagia Sophia was an Orthodox church, and Orthodox architecture has been an inspiration for Islamic architecture. And this is a truth that we need to stand in, and to also understand that Islam historically has co-opted ingenious structural systems, ingenious techniques to better its, the way it operates as a communal place of prayer. So in 2025, why can't we do the same?
A question that has nothing to do with Frenchness. I was really interested by your proposal that a space can be sacred at certain moment of the day and not sacred at others. And I found this is where the true revolution for me lies. And I wanted you to comment on that. Is it common in traditional mosque to have, you know, a kind of secular use? I know that in medieval churches it did exist in Europe, but then, you know, spaces got completely specialized in either sacred or not sacred. So, and what was the reception of the community to such an idea? And then correlated to that, the more difficult question, how do you think it redefines, because in France, it's true, there is this obsession of separation between church, state, etc., and religion in general. How do you think it might contribute to redefine the relation between the secular and the religious in a society like France? Because for me, that starts perhaps with this proposal.
Thank you for bringing up this question, because interestingly enough, this was the easiest part for the Muslim community, but it's something that puzzles people outside of that faith. And the reason for that is that actually most mosques today, especially in Europe, operate as profane spaces, let's say most of the time, because prayer time, when you look at today, takes up a minority of the time. And so what happens is two things. There's no state funding for places of worship, and especially not mosques in France. So that means that most of these places have had to generate their own income. And how do we pay for the security services, for the cleaning, for the imam? And so what happens is, for example, you would have like math classes, Arabic classes, French classes, people who'd come and tutor kids, and other forms of economic activities that take place, but they're also communal and cultural activities that already exist. So what we did was just embed in the design a reality of how it already operates. But thank you for bringing it up, because what we try to design is not polyvalent spaces, but polyvalent prayer spaces, meaning that le plus petit dénominateur commun, so the smallest common denominator, needed to be the capacity to provide a high-quality experience for prayer. But then you retro-engineer it to also allow other forms of uses to take place there. So that's to answer the first question. And then the second one, I think that actually, you know, I didn't mention it in this lecture, but we also worked on a competition for the transformation of a church that stands empty right now. And so what France and more broadly Europe is confronted with is actually the transformation of historically places of prayer that are empty except during Christmas time. But Christmas time we still need to accommodate prayer in the church. But how can we create respectful sharing of, you know, that space between profane and sacred uses? I think it's a super interesting line of inquiry, and I'm really interested in pursuing that also specifically in the transformation and adaptation of churches in France.
Hi. Thank you for your amazing lecture. It felt really fulfilling. I have two questions. They're kind of a little noodly. One is like within the space, you know, you mentioned the orientation towards east. I was wondering how like the space itself, and how did you manage that orientation, and how do you? Because initially I didn't quite see like what the like marking point was to like indicate where Mecca was. And so like I was wondering how you integrated that into the form of the space without like being like, you know, I just was wondering how you did that. And my other question is, you know, with so much flexibility, how do you manage like separation and people's comfort within there? Like not just their like comfort in terms of sound, but also their comfort in terms of temperature and things like that. I was just wondering how you know, encompassed all of those aspects in the design.
So for the first question, it's pretty easy. We got lucky. The plot is pretty much facing in the right direction, so great. That was great. And so the second question, well, there's not one response. It's a series of things that you need to take into account in the design. One thing, for example, and I think this is where, you know, the polyvalence is also generative in terms of design. We have a library that spans 2 floors, and then it operates as a prayer space, and then the rest of the time it really becomes a library space. But because we want these to be prayer spaces that are not degraded by people walking on them with shoes, for example, we need to face the fact that if you want to go to this library, you're going to have to take off your shoes. And that also means that we can create a different relationship to the floor. And so all the furniture is designed to actually be lower and closer to the ground. So actually much more reminiscent to African forms of you know, chairs sitting closer to the ground. So that's how this has impacted this question of creating a qualitative experience also for the profane spaces. And, you know, maybe you'll discover a new way to live, and then you bring that to your own apartment. That's what I have done. I don't have a couch anymore, you know, live on the floor. But it's just like, this also has, like, if you get used to a certain way of experiencing space, and if that is a place that is communal and public, then you also have like a fantastic opportunity to transform or have an impact on how people experience space in their personal lives. Thank you.
Last question. Merci beaucoup. That was a wonderful lecture. I'm not French, but I grew up in Kenya, going to a French school with majority Francophone folks, but not majority French folks. And there was kind of a notion talking with one of my old friends about how French is no longer French in terms of being of place. But we're talking about the kind of separation of spirituality from the public space, and how spirituality and communalism are separated. I'm wondering what your kind of positive vision of public space in Paris, and as the majority of French as a language is not in the country's boundaries, how the culture is changing and how spirituality, in secular or non-secular, is kind of taking on. Thank you.
So you're true to point out that French, the biggest community speaking French is now in Congo. So that's a reality, but I wonder if it's not going to shift very soon. And the reason I'm saying that is that what we have seen recently in Africa and former French colonies is also an attempt to walk away from French as a language. Algeria is doing it, Mali is doing it, Burkina Faso is getting rid of French, and Rwanda did it very successfully. And this is just to say that really language and the dominance of a language is the representation of the power dynamics that are at play. And we are seeing a shift toward the Anglo-Saxon world, and English as a universal language to be spoken ever. I don't know if this is something that is a positive or a negative. It's just something that I'm observing happening. Regarding the shift in public space, unfortunately, I think that France is extremely resistant to inspiration and change coming from its former colonies. And I think that's what I'm trying to work against in my practice, but I'm also pretty sure that it's going to be very difficult to do it by saying it outright. So I think we need to have visible and invisible agendas. And I know how this is coming out, but I still believe that if we want to achieve things that will serve a bigger purpose for communities that are being actively invisibilized, sometimes we might need to dress it up in all the clothes. And I hope this doesn't come back to haunt me later on, and someone like shows me this clip. It's like, you're lying.
That might be a good moment to finir. Merci d'avoir donné ton discours.
Thanks.